We'll take a second to let others come in. We'll give folks a minute to come in. Looks like it's populating. Just giving folks a second to get in. Welcome, everyone. We will. Where are you, Chuck? Are you in DC?
I am. I just got back to my house. I had not left in like forever, and they scheduled me something right before to go film something. I just made my first hot tea of the season because I have talked so much today that my voice is just about shot, which is hard for me because I love to talk.
Well, it looks like we have a good enough number of folks. So I do want to just go ahead and get us started here, and I suspect a few others will join us. We had about 55 RSVPs, but these are starting to become, like, I think as many folks sign up and then go to watch it later. So we are recording this for everyone's benefit. Hi, my name is Amy Pritchard. I am the founder of GAINPOWER, a platform for people who work in democratic and progressive politics to network for jobs, for career advice, for marketing, for a lot more, which I'll tell you all about another time. But today, we are just here to talk to my I'm trying to say long, not old, longtime friend, Chuck Rocha, who I'm very excited to see here, who's here today to talk to us about his professional journey and to give some career advice. And lucky for us, it's probably easy for him to talk about his career because he actually just wrote a book about his professional journey. And very specific, I'm going to hold it up because I do have it here as a prop. And as I was saying to Chuck just before we let everyone in, I actually have read the book, which, by the way, is fantastic, and everyone should get a copy and read it. And he's going to talk a little bit more about that. It's Tío Bernie, and I think it's the story, I know it's the story, both of Chuck's personal journey, but also the journey of the campaign, and he'll get a lot more into that. I've got also Josie Schreier and Avian Zobi, who work with us at GAINPOWER, and we have been, as I was saying, turning them into our web stars. We've been having them do most of the interviewing of our guests. Although I'm going to take a little bit of a personal privilege here, just with you, Chuck, to maybe kick this off a little bit before I pass it off to them. But part of the idea was I just didn't want it to be the Amy show. I have a tendency to start talking to my friends because we do know each other for so long and going off. And I think it's nice to have fresh voices and fresh faces who don't know you and don't know some of the other guests that we've had before. So their questions come from a very different place. They're new to the space and they're new as activists. So I'm thrilled that Josie and Aviance are going to be asking you the bulk of the questions today. But like I said, I did want to take a little bit of personal privilege. For folks watching here, Chuck and I have known each other a long time. I think it's officially over 20 years. I know it's officially over 20 years. And as I read the book, actually, I was reminded of when I first learned about who Chuck Rocha was before I actually, I think, met you. Goes back to, I think, right around circa 97-ish. When you were in, I think, New Mexico. I don't think I knew you before that, but I don't think we crossed paths in Texas before that. And our professional paths have sort of webbed and passed, and we have had, I'm just going to say this for full transparency, and we have had a truly, I will call this candidly, a bumpy relationship, but one that is filled with love and affection. We've also spent a little bit of time post-elections in another country, perhaps celebrating sometimes too much. So we know each other socially as much as we know each other professionally. but I'm giving that context really just to say, I learned a lot reading your book. And I'm excited that you're here today to talk about your experience and about this book, Tío Bernie, and about your path, because I think it's really important, and I'm so glad you wrote it. Also, full transparency. I have never been a big Bernie fan. It's not a big secret. I was a Hillary person, and then I was a Warren person. I've always had, I want to say I've always had immense respect for Senator Sanders. Immense respect, I really have. But I'm desperate for a woman president, and you know, he comes from a different wing of the party than I've necessarily been part of. But I learned a lot about the campaign. Obviously, I've known you forever, and I've watched the campaign as an outsider, but it was really refreshing and inspiring. There was things that I sort of knew watching it closely from the outside, but I didn't really know, obviously, until I got to read the book. And so I'm excited for you to kind of share that. And I think that I mean, I'm not just doing this because you're sitting here. I will happily tweet about it more and post Facebook about it more and Instagram about it more. I think, Chuck, you wrote a really important book. And so it's important because of the advice that you give and the observations that you make. And one of the things that I really appreciate about you is you are unfiltered and unfettered and equally honest and candid about what you think. So I just want to open this up by, and I'm going to sort of disappear and pass off to Josie and audience, but I do want to just give us a little bit of context about the book and what inspired you. And I don't want you to even tell too much because you want people to read the book. If you tell them too much, they'll have nothing to read. But, you know, talk about what brought you to this place and what made you decide to turn your experience into the book itself.
Look, Amy, thank you so much for having me. Thanks, Josie, Alliance. I really appreciate y'all taking the time. Alice and everybody, like I've just known a lot of these people a long time. Josie, you and audience, I've just meeting, which is going to be good for the question parts of this. I just felt like it needed to be said. And I think that I occupy, and you're going to get this from the questions, I am not your mama and daddy's political consultant. I am not what you think of when you think of a political consultant. And there's reasons I wrote the book. I wanted to get people to read the book by putting Bernie's picture on it, saying something cute like Tío Bernie, and highlighting the historic Latino turnout operation that we did, which was a once-in-a-lifetime campaign where nobody could ever say Latinos don't vote again, because I show you how to do it, I tell you how to do it, and go state by state on how to do it. But that's only half the book. The other half of the book is the advice part of the book, which is where I come from, the struggles that I've had in my life, mistakes I've made in my life, and how you should deal with mistakes, how I don't. Sometimes I also get real vulnerable in the book and talk about things that are part of the bumpy relationship me and Amy have had. Like I wear this immense chip on my shoulder and my temper gets the best of me all of the time. But as I become an older man, I wish I'd have known that when I was a younger man, because it would have made me not only a better person, but it would have made me a better political consultant, because my first reaction to everything is wanting to fight. And that's just because of the rough upbringing that I had. And sometimes fighting is not always the best way to accomplish what you want to get done. But when you finally become 51 years old like me, and I've got twin 3-year-old grandbabies, that you start thinking about life in a different way. I still have a huge chip on my shoulder. I still talk way too much. I'm still quick to go off the hinge to defend people that I love and a community that I love, and to call out inequalities, probably to my detriment. I probably could have been so rich I could have retired by now if I could have kept my mouth shut and not try to take on every single battle. But that's why it was important for me to do this Gain Power, because I want lots of other young people to know that if you're a young man or a young woman, especially a young woman or young man of color, you come from no means and you want to figure out, how do I actually get involved in this? How do I get involved in politics? I wanted to say, if I could summarize it in one sentence, that if an old Mexican redneck who grew up in East Texas in a trailer house with a 19-year-old mama, who's never been to college a day in his life, who had a baby when I was a baby when I was 19, who's a convicted nonviolent felon, could run a presidential campaign twice and have the luxuries and the great life and the privilege that I see myself. If I can do it, my God, those of you who are going to school, those of you who have good parents, those of you who have things, and even those of you who don't, You know that it would be possible after reading this book. And all I wanted to do was give you a little bit of a journey so that you wouldn't step in all of the poop that I've stepped in over the years that maybe could help you getting your boots dirty.
So I'm going to sit back and let them take over, but I am going to obviously sit here and I may jump in now and then. I definitely have my own questions, but I'm going to save them. I want their questions to dominate today. I can always catch up with you another day, but I just wanted to give you gratitude and respect and appreciation for sharing your journey. And I'm here to promote it in any way I can. So
thank you so much.
With that, and you should know, actually, I introduced them by name, and but it's important to know they're both sitting in the great state of Texas. So just a little more context for you.
God almighty, we're all going to be good now.
I'm in Houston, Texas. And I'll actually go ahead and kick off the very first question. You touched on it a little bit, but can you give us some more in depth on how you got your start in politics?
It was by happenstance and by luck. But there's a reason behind it. I talk about it in the factory. I went to work in a factory when I was 19. I begged my dad, who I'd lost connection with, to get me the job because I just had this baby and I needed health care, and I'd taken full custody of this child. And at the time I was doing odd jobs and didn't have insurance. My dad was a supervisor in this big factory that made tires, and everybody knew it was the best job around. So bottom line is I went to work there. They had a union. I joined the union. I was not an activist, didn't know anything about a union. I talk about in the book, I couldn't even really read and write because I was a good, as you would know, Texas football player. So you didn't have to go to many classes. They just kind of put you through school, especially if you're 6'1". And at the time I weighed 315 pounds. I was a big old all-state offensive lineman in Texas. And so I became a union steward, and I tell the story. Then I became a division steward, and I tell the story about how that happened, because it's all just happenstance, y'all. I was not woke. I was not trying to change the world. I wasn't trying to help people. I was like, I tell the story about how I got involved, and it's an important story because are activists really born, or are they made? And I kind of talk about how I was made into an activist. And then I realized, holy shit, I'm really good at this. So I want to do more of this. And then years later, stepping back and looking at it, I realized it was what I had always done, which was take care of my mama, take care of my sister, take care of my quarterback, take care of, I just felt like, because I was the biggest person in the room, I always had to be the protector. So I got involved in the union. The union got me involved in the local Democratic Party. I started putting up yard signs and knocking on doors like every other union steward. I started attending meetings. I became a precinct chairman. So it just kind of, I just kind of fell into it that way, in just doing what the other local union activists were doing, which was helping your local party and local politicians run while still working in a factory. So that was the first, when I first went to a Democratic meeting, I didn't know what a Democrat or Republican was. Sometimes here in Washington, D.C. in 2020, I still look around and not know what they are.
So what were some of those critical decision points when you decided to shift direction in your career and your activism?
Well, let me say that first. I'm gonna take this out because it's gonna get way too hot with this big old light on. I think that there's a couple points. One is deciding in 1996 that when I get an opportunity to leave that factory and go to work on the road that Amy talked about with the AFL-CIO, that my mama was there and my grandmama was there to help me take care of my kid. Because the first thing with people of color or young white people who ain't got no money, if you got a baby, who's going to take care of your baby if you're actually going to do this job that makes you travel and go work on these campaigns? So my grandmother, who, thank God, like, here's a pivotal point. She had just retired from a factory job at a factory that made air conditioners. So she's now don't have a job. She's home. She's working on the farm, but now she can be there to take care of my son while I'm going on the road, which opens me the opportunity to do this. That opened up everything that I've done since then. But if my grandmother hadn't retired and couldn't watch my baby for me at that time, I'd have never been able to do it. The fact that my dad got me that factory job, I say, is the most important thing. My father, who was never around much for me in my childhood, he did the most important thing that could have ever happened to me. Because if I didn't get that job in the factory, I wouldn't be here. There are other decisions in my life where I decide to leave the steelworkers and start my own firm. There's the last one is, and I know Amy probably chuckled when she saw this, but there's a point in the book where I try to go to work for Hillary Clinton in 15 and 16. And go over and do this big interview in this big conference room. And I'm super intimidated at GMMB. And then she ends up not hiring me because I can't pass vetting because of the criminal record I just openly talked about. So in these exercises, I learned all these critical points where if one of those things didn't happen, my life would be so much different.
Sorry. Yeah. In those rooms, did you ever have any experiences with imposter syndrome, and how'd you get over it?
You know, I've just learned what that is because I've seen folks use it. And I think that I think I saw it early on, but I didn't know what to do with it or what it was or what I was doing or what they were doing. Later in life, looking back on it, I see it, right? And I think that it's important. That was the reason I started the firm 10 years ago. It's been 10 and a half years because as I got to do this stuff with the National Union, I was always, and I didn't realize this till later either. You don't happen to you in the moment because you're so caught up. But I was always the only man or the only person of color in the room. There was never any black people in that room, the real room. There were never any Latinos in that room. And in the beginning, in the 90s, in the late 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, there weren't very many white women. Now, white women have made huge, huge gains, right? Still, probably not equity, but white women are doing just quite well compared to black women, brown women, black men. Because, and I said this morning on a podcast, and I was attacking white women so much. I was like, let's be clear. My mama's white. I love white people. And I love white women because my mama's one of them. But there's this intentional part of learning politics and what Emily's List has done, what Planned Parenthood has done, that has given a voice to these white women that I'm just almost envious of because they were so intentional. They created a whole group of consultants that do amazing work. And where these white women can actually own their own firm and create wealth and hire more women. And you watch how this tree works, right? And so I almost use that to create my firm to see if I could do that with black and brown men and black and brown women, because you don't see folks out there with that kind of intentional. You can't get a contract at Emily's List unless there is a woman-owned firm or a woman partner who's an equity partner. And I'm like, I lift them up every day because that's the way the NAACP should be. That's the way that NCLR should be, and the Latinos, and we don't do that. There's a million black and brown organizations that hire lots of woke white consultants. When I'm like, if we would do what Emily's List and Planned Parenthood and NARAL have done over the years, we could build up the same. You wouldn't be looking around looking for a black or brown consultant, right? I don't know why I went down that rabbit hole, but anyway.
I mean, that actually kind of ties into one other question I did want to ask, which was, who is the most powerful woman that's influenced you during your career?
I think it will be there's not like a woman of, because everybody says their mama and their grandmama. I mean, that's just a misnomer. I'm not going to mention them, even though they were the biggest influence in my life, right? And I would think it meant something to be raised by all these strong women, because there was never a man in my life except for my granddaddy, and I speak like him. That's his legacy, as my white grandfather comes out of my mouth all day long. It's these young women of color who I've worked with in my firm, and my firm is a consulting firm, but it's also an incubator. There's been 100 young black and brown kids come through my firm in 10 years. You come to my firm, you're not called a fellow, you're not called an intern. I call you an associate. I pay you X amount of dollars, and a year later, or 6 months later, you can go to work anywhere in this town and make $100,000. These young women have taught me what it's like to live in their bodies by sitting in the same office with them and watching how other men treat them on the phone or on email. And it was really a growth for me, because I was machismo. I was like every other redneck in East Texas, and I didn't think about the world through the lens I should. And these young brown and black women, who none of them come from shit, that's why they work for me. Like, this is who I look for to want to hire. And the men, but the men is a different story. But these women would, I remember Vanessa, who was my partner, she would turn to look at me and go, and put the phone on mute. She's like, you see what this guy's doing? You see how he's explaining this to me? I'm the partner here. Like, this is what I'm talking about. And like, she'd be schooling me every day. It wouldn't even be my fault. I'd be like, what did I do? She'd be like, no. I'm learning you right now what he's doing. If you ever do this, I'm going to knock your head off. Like, I was like, I would not do that. So those experiences over 10 years of being around these strong women of color, young, all under 30, right? Who are not scared to teach the old man, because I'm very non-restrictive at work and keep a real open work environment for us to share ideas, have made me a better person by far than any peoples that I've ever worked around.
And so for those young women under 30, those young women of color, do you have any advice for any of them who might be dealing with imposter syndrome?
I think allies is the key. I think I talk about it in the book. I think that you need to have a circle of people that look like you and come from the same places that you do. But then you need to have other allies that are in a white power structure in this city. I've gotten way more work from white people that I attack every day that own their own consulting firms than I have from any people of color, because that's where the power and the money lies. So I would say your networking is a really, really big deal. And a lot of people don't hire my firm, which is the largest person of color owned firm in the country, because they're persons of color owned or operated. They hire us because they like me or our work. So building those personal relationships with your sister or your brother who's a mid-level staffer at Planned Parenthood or at NCLR or at some super PAC, that's how you actually get the work. We don't like to talk about it, but it's still about relationships in this town.
So speaking of your firm, how did you make the decision to go into consulting?
God, that's the greatest question, because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know, nobody in my family had ever run a business. I didn't know anything about paying taxes that weren't already just taken out of your, there should be a whole school that you teach kids this. Because a buddy of mine who's Jewish, his name's John Soltz, he runs VoteVets. He's always financially helping me with money, because he's like, they taught us this in school, Chuck. How do you not know this? And I'm like, it makes me understand that financial stuff, if you don't come from means, you don't understand what the stock market is, what taxes are. But let me back up, because I'm not answering your question. I was finishing up my career at the Steelworkers, and I had fallen into a situation that I go through in the book of the reason I have this nonviolent felony. And I got convicted of embezzling $500, which was meaning you put gas in your personal vehicle with your company card. Let me be clear. And I own it. I was wrong. It was a very powerful mistake to learn, but because it's with the union, it is a felony, and it's a $500 felony. Luckily I never went to jail. There was never nothing like that because it was $500, but still I have to wear that scarlet letter every single day and try to operate in a town where politicians are so risk averse. I didn't think I could ever make it. So I was kind of forced into figuring out what I was going to do with my life because of a tragedy that had just happened. So I come to DC, and my friends helped me. My first client was that guy I just mentioned, John Soltz with VoteVets. The second was a dear friend of mine, Yvette Herrera with CWA. And then the Blue Green Alliance, because I still had skills. I still wanted to work. So I worked for the Blue Green Alliance for a while. And then I decided I'd hang out a shingle. But I had some base clients that could at least pay me what I was making at the Steelworkers. And this is the most important piece of this. This is exactly why there's not more black and brown firms out there, is because when you start a firm, unless you've got an anchor client, we call it, somebody that can pay your bills, which means pays your rent and your Metro Pass, the basic things, then you can't just ask your mom and daddy to float you $30,000, $40,000 till you get your first client. At least I couldn't. Most poor people can't. So that's why there's no people that come from that scale of the economy doing this, because there's no safety net if your mom and daddy can't give you money or you can't take a loan out. And who'd want to take a loan out for a risky business adventure anyway? So because I'd been the political director of the Steelworkers for 11 years, I had friends who would give me work, right? And so that was building and trying to build the firm out. And in the beginning, sister, I thought I was going to teach people how to do grassroots organizing. I was like, because I was considered one of the best labor political directors. I was the last political director who actually worked with my tools and never went to college and worked in the actual factory. So that gave me this unique insight. So figuring out how I was going to do the consulting, I fell into becoming a phone consultant and a mail consultant and other consultants just because I was watching and learning people around me and seeing how the business worked. But I had no idea what it entailed.
So aside from developing those relationships that you mentioned earlier, what is your advice for someone interested in working for a consulting firm?
I'll kind of talk about this a little bit in the book. I think that you need to find something that reflects your values is a little cheap, but that's what I mean. And what I mean by that is that if you're a far left socialist democrat tree hugger hippie like me, you may not want to go work for pharma or one of these big firms that makes your life, you're just uncomfortable with the work you're doing every day. The money's probably good, but it's just not your cup of tea. Find something that falls into a realm you think you will at least enjoy, even if it pays you a little less money, because you'll be more eager to do the work there. And then again, building relationships with people around that business is a key. to get into that business, into that firm, whether it's a big mail firm, a big media firm, whether it's an organized labor or a union, any of that stuff is like knowing somebody really helps. Getting your resume in front of the right people really helps. That's probably the biggest and most important thing GAINPOWER's done over the years. I remember when Amy first started it, it's like, how do we get all these great resumes to the people that me and Amy know when they're constantly just calling me and Amy looking for resumes? So, getting your stuff in front of them, but still, again, I ain't lying to you. It's still about who knows who and who do you know and who can vouch for you. It's just a big, big deal.
So what do you hope your biggest impact on the progressive movement would be?
I think I would know that I was a success, that when I retire in 10 or 15 years, there's 5 or 6 other firms that look like me or look like you. And if there are CEOs that are running those firms that look like me or look like you, then I've done my job. I've taken just enough bullets and throw my elbows just wide enough to make room for there to be more than just one Latino-owned big consulting firm in DC, because that's what I really want. That's what I've realized is my call, because I realize there's nobody else that can do it. And I don't mean that to give myself props, because I've caused myself a lot of pain and cost myself a lot of money. But if I don't make that path, there's nobody else right now that's even close to my age or has my experience who can make that path for everybody else. So I know, and my lovely fiance tells me all the time, Chuck, you don't have to fight everybody's battles. You don't have to be that guy on Twitter all the time effing with everybody. And she's right. Some of that comes from that chip. But I know that there's a certain amount of that I'm just never going to be able to walk away from. I mean, just talking to you right now, because we're all individuals, I took that hat off because I'm viscerally hot, because it upsets me to think about me leaving in 10 years and there's nothing changing, really. And so it's just that's why I'm saying find your passion. If you find something you really like to do, and then somebody will pay you money to do it, you're done.
And so working on the progressive movement led you to the Bernie Sanders campaign. What were the highs and lows of working on the campaign?
Which one?
Actually, maybe a good summary of both. Were there any repeating factors or?
I tell a story in the book. Amy told me not to give everything away, but I had give this to a political reporter, so it's open, that Bernie and Jeff came to me and offered me the campaign manager job. And when they did, I was really honored. It was one of the highest points of my life, I walked through this whole story with Bernie and Jeff, and about how early on in 2016, they were going to hire me after Hillary had turned me down. And I told Jeff and Bernie about my conviction in Pittsburgh, and they both just kind of chuckled and were like, we knew about this way back when we started talking to you. And I remember Jeff saying that, how long are you supposed to pay for something that you've already paid your price for in society? Should you be punished the rest of your life for a stupid mistake you made? And I just started crying. And I was like, oh, these are my people. Like, my God, I've just heard Democrats give lip service to redemption and to criminal justice reform, but these guys are fixing to live their values and then put their campaign at risk, because there will be an article written, again, to a risk-averse thing, right? So I just lay the groundwork there to say that 2 years later, they come to me and say, we want you to run this whole thing. The funny part of the story is, for 4 weeks leading up to that, I had been looking for a manager for them and interviewing everybody to hire all the staff. Like, I'm literally building this campaign from the ground up with Jeff. And so that was a big high, but it was also a big low at the same time, because 3 weeks later, I had to turn it down and tell them I wouldn't do it. And I would have been the first Mexican to run a national campaign that was a male. And anyway, it was very up and very low, but then looking back on it, it was up again, because it was the best thing I ever did, because it gave me more freedom. It gave me more power. They made me a senior director. I got to hire the manager. I got to hire. And because I was in charge of hiring and in charge of building the structure of the campaign, Bernie Sanders had 200 Latinos on staff. We hired more Black and brown people than any other campaign in the primary. We had over 1,200 staff, majority women and people of color. I was reflecting my values and who I was hiring every day, because I would have 15 Zoom call interviews with people around the country. And if it came time, and this probably ain't legal, the guy with the criminal record, but if there was a Black person and a white person, they were equally qualified. The Black person got the job every damn time, because I was in charge. It's just how it is. I just felt like in other worlds that works the opposite way. And in the world that I lived in, I had watched young white men be given a chance to do a job they weren't qualified for. And one white guy look at another one and go, you know, he'll grow into the job. But that never happens with young black women or young brown women or young black men. They never say, oh, they're not quite qualified, but they'll grow into the job. Well, guess who gave a lot of people in a campaign jobs that they probably needed to grow into they weren't quite qualified for? Me. Some of it bit me in my ass. Let me be clear. Like some of it did, but it was worth the risk.
Well, we know you have a lot of thoughts on the topic of Latinx organizing. Tell us what Democrats do right and do wrong.
The right thing that Democrats do is be on the right side of policy that matters the most to Latinos. That means that Latinos are by far a working class demographic. So Democrats are the ones who are normally advocating to raise the minimum wage, maybe to get more health care for people, maybe to make sure that there's some kind of child care provision. All of this stuff are things that Latinos deeply care about. And so that's what Democrats do best, is advocate for issues that best resonate with most, air quotes, Latinos. And if you've got about 3 hours, we're going to go through everything they do wrong. First thing they do wrong is they see us as a GOTV universe, like they do black people, which is also wrong. You show up at the last 2 weeks, you put a bunch of brown kids in our neighborhoods knocking on doors, you take your best English language commercial, you Google translate it to Spanish, you put it on Univision, and you've checked the box that, woo, you should see our Latino program. We are knocking it out. And on top of that, we've got endorsement by Jose and Federico and all these people over here, and that's their program. Well, that is just the wrong way to do it. And I've been on a media tour now for 3 weeks. I'm drinking this tea because I've said this so much today, that we just have learned to accept the bare minimum when it comes to Latino vote, which is about 60% of the vote. If we do a little bit of work at it, we can get it up to 67, 68, 69 maybe. But the bottom line is if you'll treat a Latino voter like you do a white woman voter in the suburbs who's a persuadable voter, a Latino voter will vote at the same propensity as she will. Now that don't make that white woman voter better or worse than the Latino voter. It just means that she's probably gotten 30 or 40 different types of communication, which makes her a very informed voter, which makes her be very engaged, which makes her persuadable, which makes her show up at every election. So we spend all of our money every time trying to persuade that white woman, where Latinos are never talked to in that way. They're giving a reduced amount of mail, hardly any digital or any TV. And if they do, it's right at the very end. In the book, I'll walk you through this state by state on how the first time we started talking to Latinos was before we started talking to white Democratic voters. So 6 and 7 months in advance of Iowa, Nevada, California. And then we invested millions of dollars. We went into their neighborhoods and we opened up the first offices to give a little hat tip to them saying, we're here and we're going to put our first office in your neighborhood. See us, here we are. We're showing up in your space. And then we spent money and hired their neighbors and their friends to man those offices. So start early, hire people who look like the community, go into that community, hire brown and black consultants who are culturally competent to make these materials. So you don't send a mariachi band picture to a bunch of Puerto Ricans in Central Florida, right? Just as an example, like my team, my firm, Solidarity, I moved them all into the campaign. We did all the paid advertising for Bernie Sanders, except for the English TV, all came through my firm. So there was a Latino writing the mail, producing the mail, making the digital spots. Like all of this means something. But if you don't do anything else, you show up early and you spend as many resources as you can. The outside game right now, in just as one example in the presidential campaign, I've been tweeting like this, like I actually had hair and it was actually on fire, is that the outside groups, the top 10 Democratic outside groups that are focused on white working class people or just white people in general have raised $500 million since 7/31 up till that point. There are 3 super PACs that Latinos are focused on getting Latinos out. And under the same time period, we've raised $5 million. So can you see what I'm doing there? They will turn and look at me and go, Chuck, why do Latinos not show up at the same rate as white voters? And I'll be like, why don't you invest in us like you invest in a white voter? Well, because white voters are 70% part of the equation. I'm like, good, I'll take the 30% that's left over. Because if you gave me 30% of $500 million, Joe Biden would win 85% of the Latino vote. And all of that is the same with the Black community. It's even worse with the Black community because Black community actually does show up at big rates and votes at 90-something%, but they still don't talk to them to the very end. Think about how many more young Black kids would show up to vote if you just went and had a conversation with them. Woo, that was good. I was feeling hot.
That was really good. That was amazing. So outside of being very passionate, having these great networking skills, what are some other skills you'd say you need for the job that you have right now?
I tell my staff to show up on time, chew with your mouth closed, and have good manners. Like basic stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned that in this world, my mama used to say, it don't cost nothing to show up on time and it don't cost nothing to chew with your mouth closed. You know, act like you're somebody. Because my mama was very proud and she had no money. You know, she worked lots of different jobs. She ended up being a beautician most of her life and doing hair for women and men. And it just has stuck with me to where I'm a real stickler about some people being on time. And let's be clear, I work around the realm of people of color, around a lot of Black and brown people. And we ain't known a lot of times for being on time for nothing. But it is just something that eats at my butt. And I'm like, look, especially if you're a young staffer, right? Like, don't be rolling up into my office 10 minutes late. Don't roll up into a meeting 5 minutes late. Like, if you want to be on time to a meeting, you be there 5 minutes early. And it just proves that you want it. It proves that you want to work for it. People like me, people like lots of people on this call, we have to get up a little bit earlier. We have to work a little bit longer. We have to be a little bit nicer because we just don't have a safety net of something else to do. So I think people look past the basics too much. And these young people get jobs on Capitol Hill. They buy their first big, nice suit, and they just think that the first thing that they had to do is be rude to people. And I'm just telling you, take it from somebody who is a hothead from the word go. I have got scars all over my face from lots of things that were misunderstandings. Normally it was somebody telling me to shut up and I thought they said stand up. That's normally what happens because I love to stand up. And so being nice don't cost nothing. And you're working in the most powerful city in the world. You're in the meetings or around the most powerful people you'll ever know. And there's some adrenaline and things that pump through your body that automatically lots of times make people think that they can be mean to other people because you got yours now and you hang on to it. So the advice would be not only be nice, chew with your mouth closed and show up on time, but it would be like, you should be real careful. There ain't no reason to step on nobody else. But in politics and in this town, it comes around 100 times. And I guarantee you, when you step on somebody, you're going to deal with that person again and again. And it's just good advice to be good to people or have somebody else be the bad person. I tell my staff all the time, like there's only one bad person in our campaign or in our firm, and it's me. None of them are allowed to get mean or mad with anybody. And if somebody super disrespects them, they stop the conversation. They'll find a reason to get away from it. They'll put themselves in a safe space and they'll let daddy know. Because me, then I get in it. Because I'm the one who will take that bullet. Like, you don't talk to my people that way, but you don't put yourself out there. I'll take care of this. So I do that to protect their relationships with whoever, right? Because I don't want them, but be nice to people is what I'm saying. I should just summarize there.
So outside of work etiquette, do you recommend that people get a variety of experiences or really focus on one area of work, like communications, field, direct mail, etc.?
It's a great question because it's right in both aspects. I see young people come to DC and float around from job to job and firm to firm, and they never really stay there long enough to get the experience to be good at one of those things. My papa said, do one thing and do it really good and do it a lot. And see if you can get somebody to pay you to do it. But I mentor lots of young folks, and I try to tell them that they need to pick one of those silos and get the experience and then go to another one. But they need to spend some time to get decent at that first one before you jump to the next one, because your goal should be to manage people and to manage a race or to manage an organization. And you need to have a general conception of what goes on in those other departments to be a good manager. When I worked in that factory, the best managers we ever had were not the ones we hired out of college to manage men. And it was mainly men, 99% men. It was the men like my father who had worked his way up from being a janitor to then being a supervisor because he understood the work and he understood what they were going through. Not that he was as sympathetic as he should have been or this one or whatever, but he knew the jobs. And if you know how to do comms and you know how to do field, the best thing that I ever did coming up was do that grassroots work where I was knocking on those doors and I was having those conversations, because now I started my career knowing about field. And field is not something that's the sexy part of campaigns, but it's some of the most important work.
So we get a lot of questions about people switching into politics in the middle of their career. Do you have any advice for people who want to do a mid-career switch?
I think it all depends where you are in the industry that you're in. I think Barack Obama was a great example of a lot of lawyers and folks who were inspired to see this rock star of a black man who was just a once in a lifetime candidate. And he's quit their damn job and was like, I work for Barack Obama. I remember meeting people in field offices who's like making phone calls. And I was like, where'd you come from? He's like, I was a lawyer in New York City and I quit my job. And I was like, what the hell? Like, how do you do that? Like, how are you making your car payment? Like, that's I turned into my mother. I'm like, oh my God, how, are you all right? Do you need somebody to buy you some groceries? But, you know, they did fine, but it's harder. You can't use the Barack Obama thing about it, the experience. But I do think it's reciprocal. But the problem is the way people like me and senior people in campaigns look at a resume. And after hiring all of those people for Bernie, and you want to talk about some crazy people who will quit their job for somebody, you should go and work on Bernie Sanders. They some crazy people over there, right? So let me just say that. And if they didn't, when I would look at the resume, I would try not want to hire them because they were 35 and had never worked in politics, but were willing to quit their job as this mid-level manager doing something. Like, I would try to think where that's applicable, but nobody else does that in our field. So I think it's easier when you're in a position of power in the non-political jobs. But I think my book, read my book, buy 100 of my books, throw 99 of them in the trash, take them something, buy a bunch of them. I got bills to pay around here. But anyway, if you will look at what I'm saying in the book, don't find yourself just in one silo. You got to get out of that. And I think you can do that it's good and bad. I don't have an answer for that.
Well, circling back to your practices and skills, what would you say is your superpower and when did you discover it?
That's a great question. Getting along with people. As much as I'm a hard ass, like, people like me. And I like people. And I was a fat kid. And because I was a fat kid, girls don't like going out with fat boys. So one of the skills I had was my mama would say is the gift of gab. She would have said I'd have made a good Baptist preacher if you would have asked her if she was still alive today. And what that meant, I was still as smooth as a fat man as I was now as a non-fat man. And I'm semi-fat now, but not near as big as I was then. But when you're a big old boy, 300 pounds in high school, and you want to get a girl to like you, you need to be funny. You need to be charming. You need to be, you know, all the things that a mate or a partner would look for. And so I think that gave me a skill set to be able to be funny and to make light of my own situation and make fun of how I talk or make fun of something else to make people feel comfortable. I can read a room really well. And nobody works a room like Chuck Rocha. Like, Amy's cut off and she's just giggling because she knows I am a smooth operator and it's just a gift. But I find that what God gives you, God takes away. And what I mean by that, I also make up for my own lack of intelligence and my lack of understanding of the rest of the world in these powerful rooms. So I couldn't read and write real well after high school. I never went to college. I was doing all this work for politicians and I couldn't even have found Germany on a map. Like, I'd never knew nothing about nothing. Like, I was just ignorant as the day is long, but I was this really great little campaigner. So if you make light of things and be funny and make people like you, I was just trying to make up for my own insecurities, which were around all the different aspects of what most people just go through in their regular daily lives, how to work an Excel spreadsheet, you know, how to work a subway, like things like that, where I couldn't do any of that stuff. So I would make people laugh at me and be funny to try to pull them off.
Okay, so we're going to pivot into audience questions. And we have one question, somebody who's looking for advice to land a position after an election.
I have this question a lot because I mentor lots of folks, and I say that after an election, you know, leading up to an election, you should have relationships with electeds who will be filling up their offices with staff. And the first thing they do is they hire people from their campaign. Like a lot of people are like, should I go out and volunteer for somebody and get to know them if they're going to win? Chuck, can you tell me who's going to win? Because I want to go to work on Capitol Hill. That's one place, is on Capitol Hill. It's a horrible place to work. I don't know why none of y'all want to work there. But anyway, the other place is in an administration. So like if Joe Biden wins, there's going to be a lot of junior jobs available in administration for good Democrats. So, you know, finding out who you have at the transition team is a big deal. Again, who you know. Like I just found out a good friend of mine who was a chief of staff for Ben Ray Lujan is going to be over at the transition. You know, she's a super good sister, always looking out, woman of color, you know. The third thing is these organizations is like these big organizations who will either staff up or staff down, like a MoveOn.org, like an Indivisible, like a labor union. Like these are places that I would think about who will still have jobs after the election is over. Normally, the firms, like consulting firms, will all downsize. Like I've got a core group of staff and everybody else does. Nobody hires after an election in a consulting firm for the most part, unless they're doing corporate lobbying work. But that leads me to my last point is lobbyists and people who are doing lobbying work. That will be the fastest growing industry for the Democrats outside of the administration after this election's over. Everybody will be hiring people that know Democrats who would want to go lobby or work in an office. The administration jobs and the lobbying jobs, because what these corporations do now is they need to have people who have a relationship with Democrats, because Democrats are going to run everything. They're definitely going to continue to have the House. We're probably going to get close to a majority in the Senate. And, you know, if the election was held today, it's, you know, it's probably 60-40 that Biden wins. So just looking at the numbers, that's where the growth potential will be for opportunities to get a job.
And for somebody who's working in advertising and branding, how do you think they should reach out to campaigns?
It'll be hard to get a job in a media firm next year because there's no work. It's just hard, but that's where you should be working if you're working in branding. But I would be thinking about digital advertisement. Some of these big digital firms who have non-political clients, they still will be, you know, doing work. You know, the Blue State Digitals, the other big digital firms that do lots of non-political work, but their TV firms will not be hiring anybody for 12 months after this election's over.
So this next question comes from someone who wants to get involved in local politics and activism. Their state is solidly blue, but their area is relatively conservative, and their town went for Trump in 2016. They want to know how they can affect meaningful change as a progressive in a purple or even red area.
It's a great question. I think around issues. I think that not as much around campaigns, but issues that drive a narrative in a city, whether it's, I'm thinking about lead pipes. I think about environmentals and the fires, right? Like getting involved with a local women's league that does the debates, local Sierra clubs, locals, Black Lives Matter, which they probably don't have if you're a city voted for crazy ass Donald Trump, but I digress. But if you, around issue advocacy, I think about the Sierra Club, I think about the PTA, I think about something that's community-based involvement is the key there. I ain't leaving. I'm just picking up my computer and bringing it with me because I got to go turn on my oven because I got to cook something here in a minute. So we're going. I'm good. I got my headset in. You just don't get to see the pretty light. You'll see me out of the light and in the dark.
So I'll go ahead and take the next question. I'm going to go ahead and read this one verbatim. I'm a white-facing Colombian Texan. I'm on my 9th cycle, and I'm currently in a director position in South Florida. I will not be receiving a contract extension after November. I feel like I'm stuck in field roles, and I can't move up easily because I'm paying a mortgage on my house here. What would you recommend as the next step?
That's the worst position. I hate to put that to you, but you have been and done the toils of the work, and you should be getting rewarded for that work, and you are not. And I talk to people like you all the time. What's her name or his name?
I didn't catch a name.
That's fine. That's fine. I just hate talking about somebody like that, not addressing them as their name, just out of respect. So anyway, I digress. Finding validators and people that that can help get you to that next level, because now you're tied because you ain't 22 no more, but you're not as old as me. Like, because you should be managing something bigger now and using that manager skill, but you're going to have to find, white people ain't going to give you that shot. And because you're Colombian, you need to find somebody who's doing community-based involvement work and probably try to go up that tree of management. I know that it doesn't sound like I know what I'm talking about, and I kind of don't, but I just have seen people like you who spent so much time being the field person that people forget about that other skill set that you learn around field. That would be the other thing. Just because you're field, don't always just think you got to put field on that resume when you're talking about it. You've managed people, and at the granular level of managing people, that for field folks is just a rarity. Like, you people who've done this for a long time, who do this field work, like, you make some of the best managers because you're deal with adversity all day, every day. So that management keys, don't downplay that. You should upplay that, because it is a very big skill.
Well, this next person writes, I enjoy seeing you on The Rising and appreciate your work for Bernie. I was a super volunteer for Sanders in 2016, where I was a top volunteer recruiter in California. I want to keep helping with grassroots organizing for progressive issues. What do you think is a good direction after this year? Work as a union organizer, or perhaps more mainstream Democratic candidates, or work for a real progressive long shot campaigns like AOC? Can we make progress working for organized labor now? Sorry, a lot of questions packed in.
You can always make a difference working for a labor union. It's just hard to get in. So that's always a good option. I would keep this in mind, though. All the congressional districts are fixing to change, and everybody's going to run in a different congressional district. Every state rep district is fixing to change, and they're going to have to run in a new district because of the census. So there's going to be way more opportunity next year for way more primaries to happen a year and 2 or 3 months from now, because of the changing map. It won't be like it always is, because there's just going to be so many new districts, and there's going to be a ton of competitive seats in 2 years. The question is, what do you do in the meantime, right? And I think you have to sit back and wait and see who wins this election. Because if Donald Trump wins re-election, there's going to be a huge uptick in hiring to hold Congress accountable and try to deal with whatever he's going to do over the next 4 years. But if Biden wins, you're going to have all of these people that are going to leave organizations to go to work in the administration, then we'll leave those jobs vacant for people like you if you don't want to go into the administration. And I would keep my eye on, progressive funded groups that actually have real money. Because, trying to save, the winged squirrel in whatever forest ain't paying the bills.
So that was, I believe, the last question, and we would turn it over to Amy at this point. Yes, there she is.
I'm coming back on. And I was smiling and chuckling. He's right. He's right. Well, actually, you guys skipped over one question that I thought other folks might want to hear, which was just about, Chuck, you are a very popular talking head on TV. And I know some of the answer to this, but I want sort of your experience. Has that helped you? Is that something you recommend doing? I have my own thoughts on it, but I'm curious. You do a lot of it.
Yes and no. Well, I've been doing a lot of it lately because of the book, right? And I've been told to do it. But what it does, and I think I should speak of it from a person of color, is that it don't really help your business that much. Like, people aren't going to hire you because they saw you on MSNBC. But what it does do is, if you're running a super PAC, if you're doing this other thing, it validates you sometimes with white power brokers who then see you. Somebody who, I've become, sounds bragging, I became a contributor to the New York Times, where I have an opinion piece. And so people now think that I know what I no, but Amy's laughing because I'm the same dumbass who's been doing this forever. I just now write about it in the New York Times. I had nothing new, but that validated me with a certain class of people who read the New York Times as gospel. And so that's where it can be helpful, because it can validate you where people are like, oh, he does know.
Yeah. For the record, I was laughing because I actually had my own first piece in the New York Times this past year.
Nice.
And it's kind of heady, right? Like, it's just kind of weird. I mean, my parents are no longer with me, but I didn't care except they would have cared, right? Like, it's the kind of thing, my mother would just die to know that I was published in the New York Times.
I framed mine and gave one to my mother. Let's be clear.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of thing. But in our political world, no, not a huge big deal, right? But it is a validator. You know, I'm gonna put you on the spot since I just referenced my story. I'll say why I wrote my story, which is I took a pretty public position, published in the New York Times, as it turns out, critiquing, like you. I also am critical of our party, and very specifically critical of our party for trying to punish consultants who might want to actually work for folks who might challenge a sitting incumbent. So fairly controversial. And you and I have not talked about this, so I'm sort of curious about your position on this topic. And for context, the DCCC, who I'm an alumni of, and I love, by the way, I want to say that publicly with great affection and huge, immense respect for what they do. But I think they personally made a flawed decision. And like I said, I've been quite vocal about it, and to the point of actually having to leave my firm and have had some other issues related to it. But I'm curious what you think about that.
I mean, I think that they were wrong as well. I think that we shouldn't limit. I think that's how many young progressives and young firms break in, right? And as somebody who had a big DCCC contract the year they did that, I mean, just to be honest, I created another LLC and continued to do all the damn work I wanted to do for challengers as well. I never stopped, but I really, really needed that DCCC contract because I was just broke and needed that money to pay. Here you go again. I can't give up $1 million contract because I haven't built enough wealth to keep things floating without it. So I watched Amy take a stand, knowing that I was privately taking a stand, but I didn't put myself out there like her because I knew I needed to protect $1 million contract, which to me is a lot of money. But it's absolutely wrong. And keep in mind, the guy who ran Bernie Sanders' campaign, like the guy who's out here trying to help all kinds of people run for office, it just cuts off way too many good consulting firms from doing things. And it's a reason why there's not more women, more people of color doing this work.
Well, we're running up to the hour. I really do have a lot more questions, and I'm going to take my privilege of following up with you after, because you touched on a couple of things that we clearly don't have time for here, but they really are a lot of what we care about, and one of the things that we want to focus on, which is not just getting people to work in campaigns, but promoting them throughout their career, whether that's in consulting, whether that's in firms, whether that's on campaigns, whether that's in nonprofits, whether that's with labor. And you have done an enormous amount of work on this, both for other consultants, which you don't talk about in the book. So I want to bring up something else just to give you a little more props in supporting other consultants by forming an association to promote them. And so like I said, we'll come back to you on this and talk more, because you talked earlier in this conversation just about what we need to do to teach people how to do business. And I really don't think there's really anything like this in our space, you know, and it is business and it is hard and nobody teaches this. Certainly they don't teach us this, you know, and I can tell you I made a not insignificant, I feel like it was like $30,000 tax mistake in my first year of business. That was real money out of my pocket. And anyway, we could go on, and there's a lot of lessons to learn and how to do a business. And like I said, we don't really learn that here. So I'm going to ask you back for more conversation just on that and think about how we do it both as an organization and as a movement. But I just want to thank you again for joining us. I also want to thank you again for writing the book. I want to thank you. I will tell you, by the way, Chuck, there were 2 points in the book that I did shed tears, legit tears. And I have a lot of other comments, and I will write my reviews. I haven't done that yet. I read it and I bought it, but I haven't written my reviews yet. But 2 things that I really appreciate, and it's the very end of the book, and that is where you name, and I'm even going to get emotional about it, and I don't even know these people, but we name all the staff. And because the funny thing is I read it from the beginning to the end. I didn't like skip forward and backward. And in the beginning, I was underlining people's names because I want to know all these people.
Right.
I personally,
You didn't know they were in the back.
yeah, I didn't know they were in the back. When I got there, I was like, they're all there. And I love that you name them. I love that you shout them out throughout it. And I love that, more importantly, that you brought them into the campaign and what you've done to contribute to their lives and to the lives of our movement and our party. So just thank you for that. Thank you for being here today. And I have a lot more to say and a lot more that I want you to say to some of our folks. So hopefully you'll come back after the election. We'll talk about other things that we can do. I'm going to put you on the spot and already ask you to join us. We're planning some post-election events, some career panels, this kind of thing, to talk back to the gentleman's comment about, you know, not having a job after the election. We are very mindful of the fact that win or lose, thousands of people, our people are about to lose their jobs. And sadly, it happens every cycle. Like I said, win or lose. And it's real, and we're in a pandemic. And so we're going to be a big part of supporting people. So I'm going to ask you to come back and be part of that. And I know you'll say yes, because I know you, like me, we live and breathe this every day. We have for years. So thank you for that.
Thank you for having me, and thanks your team. And I want to thank Josie and Aviance as well. Thank you so much for the great questions, and I look forward to seeing you in person when the COVID's over.
Forward to seeing you too. Thanks
to all our participants. Thanks for the questions, and we will be back next week. We have Reggie Hubbard joining us from Move On, who's another amazing movement activist, and we'll share some of his stories. And we've got a few others planned between now and the election, but obviously we're focused on the election, so lots of work to do. So with that in mind, I'm going back to my client work because I got work to do.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, take care. Thank you. Bye, all.